Your supply chain can make or break your business. With Global Trans, you have the advantage of innovative logistics technology, expansive solutions and carrier network, and a partner committed to your success. Global Trans, freight driven by technology.
Welcome to the inaugural episode of Off the Supply Chain, the show for shippers and all the ways we think about the interconnected relationships of the supply chain. If the supply chain is all about cooperative competition, so is our show. We're bringing you compelling perspectives from 3 market experts. Today we're talking about war, trade wars. What are they good for? Most economists say trade wars are good for absolutely nothing, other than raising prices and costing consumers. But is it really a trade war if the goal of the imposed tariffs is coercion, imposing pain on other countries to force them to change their policies in our favor? Our analysts will answer that question and other compelling questions throughout our show.
And now over to our host, Chad Prevost.
Our contestants for today's Off the Supply Chain show, John Paul Hampstead, our associate editor at FreightWaves, Craig Fuller, founder and CEO, and Seth Holm, analyst here at FreightWaves. Guys, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here.
It's great to have you discussing some trade war action. The rules of the game, of course, each contestant gets 40 seconds to respond to each of the questions, and then they get a brief follow-up to argue with any of the other contestants' opinions. We keep score. It's a show of competitive banter, and the winner is the Off the Supply Chain Champion of the Week. Let's get started. The US-China trade war has entered a dangerous new phase. Tariffs are up and more could be on the way. Bloomberg economists Dan Hansen and Tom Orlik say if tariffs expand to cover all US-China trade and markets slump in response, global GDP will take a $600 billion hit by 2021, the year of peak impact. So guys, what are the chances we see things get worse before they get better? Let's start with you, Seth.
I think they're high, but with a caveat. I think they will get worse after the Christmas season. So in the latest round of the remaining $300 billion in tariffs, President Trump dialed them up to 10%, but then he kind of walked it back because he was fearing that with a strong consumer, it might disrupt Christmas season. However, I do think we're sort of on the cusp of a new Cold War that could last decades because these aren't easy issues to sort out, and you have heavy bipartisan support from both Republicans and Democrats for taking tough policy stance on the Chinese.
So Craig, what do you think? Worse before it gets better?
Well, I do think it's a matter of perspective. There are parties that believe that putting it to China and forcing them to adhere to international rule of law around environmental and human rights policies actually benefits us in the long run because it forces China to play on an even field that we're all forced to play. Having said that, there is going to be short-term pain as we deal with the changing of supply chains, and there's certainly going to be disruptions. What is interesting is globally we are seeing monetary policy. Most countries are going into negative and quantitative easing, which actually makes the U.S. as a very strong place to park money and could actually help our economy as we deal with these issues.
What do you think, JP? Worse before it gets better, as these two guys seem to think?
I think actually, Chad, it gets better before it gets better. I think we should diversify away from our trade relationship with China by any means necessary. If you look at the ouster of the Cathay Pacific CEO who was forced by China to resign because he wouldn't turn over the names of his employees who were involved in protests, it's clear that when we trade with China, we're not trading with companies, we're merely empowering a regime that does not deserve to exist.
Whoa, powerful words. So how is it going to get better before it gets better, guys? And also, did Donald Trump retreat from a position of strength, like by allowing the tariffs not to go forward through the retail season? Let's just hit right back with you, JP. What do you think?
I think the pace of it is tricky to time correctly because of the global slowdown and people worrying about the recession in the US. And I think that the implementation has been unpredictable, which is really negative for things like business investment and industrial production, which wants policy certainty more than anything else. So, I agree that there will be short-term pain, but this is something that we have to do.
Craig, you sticking by your guns. This is something that we need to do. A lot of people disagree with it.
Well, I think Donald Trump's biggest asset and his biggest liability is his unpredictability and the fact that he's willing to follow through. Regardless of what the data says and regardless of public sentiment, he just doesn't care. He's going to do what he wants to do on his terms, and if he doesn't get his way, he's willing to take his ball home. That's what we saw. It's interesting to see going into the holiday season that he actually retracted his original position, because I think he realized that consumers that often were the folks that elected him are going to be the most impacted.
Okay, Seth, I mean, do you think that we'll see peak impact in 2021, as some analysts are saying, or you think this will be a longer-term proposition?
Well, peak impact is going to be a function of how high the tariffs rise on a percentage level. The media seems to think that 25% is the highest ceiling it could possibly go. That's not true. You could raise it to whatever percentage you wanted to. But as things stand now, you've got, what is it, $250 billion at 25%, and you've got $300 billion at 10%, but excluding some cell phones and laptops and stuff like that. But it can definitely go higher and get and be peak year beyond 2021.
Fantastic stuff, guys. After round one, we have Seth with 5, Craig and JP with 4. Okay, guys, got to bring it now. Round number 2. Since the 1990s, policymakers and business titans have assumed that the world would become more integrated. The greatest symbol of that process was the relationship between China and the US. Two nations with polar opposite political systems and ideologies were still becoming intertwined. So much so, the term to describe it was coined Chimerica. So, guys, are we going to see a profound shift in businesses either relocating out of China or refusing to work with them at all? Craig, let's start with you.
They already are. We're seeing Vietnam take the world stage. We're seeing parts of Southeast Asia like Malaysia, Indonesia, other countries really stepping up. Singapore is going to be the biggest beneficiary of any country on the planet from this policy change, because it's going to be viewed as a stable part of Southeast Asia and an important economic driver. Certainly with what has happened in Hong Kong, Singapore becomes the place that if you want to conduct foreign business in Asia and you're going to have expats, you're going to locate them in Singapore and not locate them in other parts of Asia.
JP, what do you think?
I agree. I think that China's share of Asian imports and global imports already peaked in 2014. They're losing high-end share to places like South Korea and Taiwan. They're losing low-end share to places like India and Vietnam. So I think that's already happening, and I think the more that global economic players realize that Chinese corporations are agents of the Chinese state, that process will just continue to accelerate.
Okay, Seth?
Well, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal about Vietnam has taken up a lot of share, but I don't think it's that easy. So it's kind of a nightmare. They don't have the logistics in place. They don't have the manufacturing capacity in place. When you think about the U.S. economy, it's a $21 trillion economy, and consumption grows at 3 or 4% every year. That's $700 billion in incremental manufacturing that you need for these consumer goods, and China's been building up this network for over 30 years. So I think that idea in theory is in place, but it may be harder in practice.
Well, and I would say that if these relocations happen, it really will have to take place over a long period of time. How permanent do you think these relocations are, Seth?
Well, just given the fact that capital spending for these factories, you're talking hundreds of millions or billions of dollars, and so that does have a useful life of a decade or more. So you can think of it as at least a decade. So unless President Trump gets out of the office and things get better very fast, this is going to be a very long-term, drawn-out process.
Craig, do you agree? Do you see things happening over a long enough time for like a Singapore to really emerge and some of these other nations?
Well, Singapore has already emerged as one of the world's most successful economies, and it's because it doesn't have the geopolitical pressures that you see in other parts of Asia. Having said that, I think it's a long term. We can't turn back the clock. What's happened is done. Companies that took the China-American relationship for granted and thought that geopolitical stability would be there indefinitely, have learned their lessons and are now relocating in other parts of the world. Latin America, Africa, and other parts of Southeast Asia are winners.
Wow. JP, what do you think? This is a gigantic deal. It's going to last a lot longer than one presidency?
I do think it will. I think that a lot of it, though, depends on the evolution of China's own economy and whether it can avoid the middle income trap. If it truly becomes a sort of a mature post-industrial society that's consumer oriented, then I think manufacturing will have to be permanently located in peripheral countries.
Wow, okay. And after round 2, Seth falling slightly behind. 6, Craig at 9, and JP at 7. Round 3, let's take it away. Taking a deeper look at these tariffs imposed on China, what is the end goal? After all, the tariffs Trump imposed on Canada and Mexico in an attempt to force a renegotiation of the North American Free Trade Agreement led to microscopic differences that may not even make it through Congress. So, guys, do trade wars ever result in fundamental policy changes under coercion? JP, let's start with you.
I definitely think so. I mean, I think the main thing is not that we, can make President Xi, a nice guy, right? Or give Chinese people freedom of speech, or get the government to stop stealing our technology. The best thing for us to do is just to stop enabling them, to stop feeding them, and to, create more options and strengthen our relationships with other countries that aren't our direct adversaries.
Okay, so a lot of people say that this is under coercion. We're trying to create this policy change. Do you think that this is a way to move forward with it, Craig?
Well, trade wars create political instability. Cutting off trade is actually one of the biggest reasons that companies go to war, because you create economic strife. We went to war against the UK and Britain because they were trying to tax us and were trying to regulate how our products float off our shores. There is a sovereign element to this, and there creates a lot of pressure. We certainly see geopolitical pressures happen in places that are embargoed. It forces countries to be more desperate, and then they end up choosing arms. The best thing for political peace, for worldwide peace, is to have global free trade, and that is a thing of the past.
Wow, okay. What do you think, Seth?
Well, I think when we've tried everything else, so when you try to get China to peacefully agree with the trade agreements, they just don't do it. So I'm not sure this is the best plan, is to go about it with tariffs, but it may be the only one that makes sense. And I do think it's hurting China worse. If you look at their GDP growth, it's something like the worst and slowest growth in like 30 years. So I do think he has gotten at them, and they're fighting back. They don't like to lose face. That's the difficult part. So as long as they don't like to lose face, they're not going to agree with them, and they're not going to give in.
So apparently it does make it worth the short-term pain to take these risks. We don't see any other options. Is this sort of China's soft imperialism, their way of just trying to take control of the world? How do you see it, Seth?
Yes, I mean, I think if you look at Xi, he had this one belt, one road policy where he basically told the world that China was going to make their presence known in the next decade. And so President Trump has been against China for 30 years, and that's not going to change here. And I do think you have to rein them in somehow, and this is the way that he's going about it.
What do you think, Craig? You agree with Seth?
Well, the most dangerous outcome here is that if you can't make money with other countries, you're going to end up making war with them. And that's the bigger geopolitical risk, is that it actually may force China to build up a much stronger military if their economic resources don't achieve their goals. China has a lot of issues. They have to keep their economy growing, because if they don't have people that are employed, it will create political strife. No one wants to live under a communist regime unless they're making money.
Wow, okay. JP, what do you think?
I think that initially with the One Belt, One Road thing, people thought that China could be a benevolent global vendor of infrastructure, like the United States is a global vendor of security.
Right.
But it actually turns out that China is a rapacious ethno-state that resembles the 19th century European empires far more than the United States ever has.
I'm giving you points for rapacious ethno-state.
I think, yeah, they have to be stopped.
What does that mean?
It means that
Wait,
it means that if you're not a Han Chinese person, they have utter contempt for you and they'll take your stuff.
Okay, I've never heard that term. We're literally creating terms here that I've never heard of.
Apparently we're ethnocentric, but they're a rapacious ethno-state.
We're far more diverse than they are.
Okay, well that is exciting stuff. After 3 rounds leading into our lightning round, Craig has a commanding lead now.
Boom!
Of 14 points, followed by JP's 10 and Seth, 8 points. Come on, Seth, it's not over yet. All right, 3 topics in our lightning round. On Monday, the White House announced China wants to talk trade. President Trump then tweeted, quote, "Great respect for the fact that President Xi and his representatives want calm resolution. So impressed that they are willing to come out and state the facts so accurately. This is why he is a great leader and representing a great country. Talks are continuing." China is ready to strike a deal. Big deal or little deal, JP?
It's a little deal. How many times has the S&P 500 rallied on hopes of a trade deal? This isn't going to happen anytime soon.
Okay, Craig?
Donald Trump's tweets are fiction. Who knows what is real and what's not? It's a little deal because it's hot air in the form of a tweet.
Okay, Seth? You agree with these guys?
Yeah, I do agree. I mean, it's a little deal. It's become a circus how often he tweets. And then, he tweets something aggressive and then he tries to force the Fed to lower interest rates immediately afterwards.
Okay. All right. Everybody's in agreement. Little deal across the board. Next topic. JP Morgan's chief U.S. equity strategist says the renewed optimism on equities comes from assumptions for a partial U.S.-China deal. Big deal or little deal, why or why not? Craig?
It's hard to say. I'm going to say little deal. It's hard to say. I think equities are completely disconnected from what's happening on trade policy because they've maintained their growth in spite of tariffs coming in.
Okay, Seth, what do you think?
I think it's a little deal. I mean, Trump has made 3 big tweets regarding trade, and every time he does it, he crashes the stock market by 5 or 10% within a week. So if we go back up to 25% tariffs, I think you're going to see another 5-10% immediate and swift drawdown in the stock market. So I wouldn't take that for granted at all.
Sounds like a pretty big deal if it's affecting the trade markets. What do you think, JP?
I think it's a big deal, not because I'm optimistic about the trade situation, but because I think it's a big deal that we have a president who is manipulating the stock market on a daily basis. I think that's something that makes it very difficult for savers and investors to navigate. But I think if you want to know the truth, look at the bond markets. They're much more pessimistic.
Okay, final topic. This is for the for all the marbles. Japan has moved to limit exports of chemicals to big South Korean chip makers like Samsung, citing vague threats to Japan's security. Seoul says a political dispute is the real reason for the move. Big deal or little deal, why or why not? JP.
I think it's a big deal. We're trying to be allies of both Japan and South Korea, and they do have long simmering ethnic and political tensions with each other dating back, to the beginning of the 20th century. I think we need everyone else to get along if we can really provide a strong counter to China's influence in the region.
Okay, Seth, what do you think?
I think it's a big deal. It shows that the U.S. and China are not alone in terms of trade wars. It's also, I think, a bigger function of demographics. You have really aging populations, even in China and pretty much everywhere across the developed world. So low growth creates tension.
Okay, and Craig, final word.
Yeah, you have to look at history. I think it's a little deal. Japan has always fought these economic battles by using other reasons to get their way. They've used trade as a bartering agreement to help their own economy. It's a matter of history.
Wow, fantastic responses. That brings us to the end of our Off the Supply Chain game. Our very first one. Thanks for tuning in. Hope you had fun. Our winner, Craig Fuller.
Boom.
17 points, followed by JP at 14, Seth at 12. What a lively discussion. Thanks for setting the standard for everybody else. And thanks to you for tuning in.
Thanks for watching our inaugural episode of Off the Supply Chain. Tune in next week when we talk about transparency in the supply chain.
Global Trans offers a full suite of solutions around logistics, supply chain, and transportation.
Technology is what we do. Global Trans is bringing the trucking industry into the 21st century. From a small family-run business to now almost $1 billion company. We did that all together as a team. We're bringing the people, processes, and software together.
When I joined the company 3 years ago, I was attracted to the high growth and fast-paced environment. But I'm proud to say that we still have that nimble entrepreneurial spirit.
As a leader in logistics technology, our platform allows us to serve any market, any mode, at any time. We're at the forefront of the logistics market.
Our teams will always find a way to adapt to the best possible solution to service our customers.
Our team is here for our customers, literally 24/7 by 365, because we need to be, and we'll get it done anytime, anywhere. We have a very competitive team, and that's what we really enjoy doing.
Our mantra is simple: we are the future of freight.